My name is Tanya Verhulp, and I'm the Director of Executive Education here at the Haskayne School of Business. Thank you for joining us today for the next session as part of our series Haskayne Connects. Haskayne Connects was created to help you navigate through these uncertain times with quick tips and ideas to move forward. We've been hosting these sessions every week on a variety of topics, and we'll have one more session next week, so please join us if you can. All 6 previous sessions have been recorded and are posted on our website if you're interested in taking a look. A quick note that we ask that you hold your questions until the end. We have left plenty of time to take as many as we can. We're so fortunate to have Patty, Marilyn, and Beth with us today, and I'd like to thank them for taking time to share their experience and insights. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lauren Falkenberg, who will be moderating our session today.
Welcome everyone to our discussion of what is keeping you awake at night. We developed our title because of a recent survey of global executives that we found in the MIT Sloan Management Review. The findings of this survey are in front of you, and many of you will be able to identify with the listed issues. A key takeaway from this slide is that most of the respondents have a short-term perspective, about 6 months out. Only about a third of the companies have started thinking longer term, which may mean that they're going to continue to have many sleepless nights. Today, we have directors from the retail or B2C sector, from the resource sector or B2B sector, and the not-for-profit sector. So let's start with Patricia. What is keeping you awake at night?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm on a number of boards, but the board I'm sort of primarily here to speak from my experience with is Calgary Co-op. Calgary Co-op is one of North America's largest retail cooperatives, approximately $1.2 billion in annual revenues. And it conducts its businesses in 6 primary lines, including grocery, petroleum, wine, spirit, liquor, cannabis, pharmacy. And we also are somewhat quietly, that people are not aware, we're Calgary's 5th largest property management or landlord in commercial real estate because we own so much of our own property. So Calgary Co-op, of course, through COVID, many of our lines of businesses were deemed essential service. And some of those have done well, predominantly grocery and liquor. We're all coping and with food and liquor, but other areas of our business, petroleum and our commercial real estate, have been hit very hard. Real estate in particular, because so many of our tenants are small businesses that were shuttered and may or may not come back. So that's just to give you sort of an overview of the organization, the retail organization that I come from. And I would say this, Calgary Co-op, the recession really started for us, not with COVID, but in 2015 when the energy markets changed so dramatically in Calgary. And we have made a number of strategic shifts to control more levers of a retail business and work on our sustainability. And in essence, those have played reasonably well for us into the COVID situation. And I would say primarily that was from a supply perspective, resources in-house, and communication. So you'll hear me say this a few times, but a crisis-ready board, we were ready for the crisis of that transition that had a plan and the right people in place. And I think it levers well into any large crisis situation. What's keeping me up at night from a board perspective, certainly the immediate operational issues, no doubt about it. Forecasts, health and safety, supply chain, brand, employee burnout, those kinds of things that are what I'd call the react phase to COVID. In the medium term, or from a recovery perspective, it's assessing as a board what's permanently changed versus what's a temporary setback. Things like the second wave of COVID or third wave, food inflation, business closures for our real estate, customer perception, and economic impacts, really affecting our ability to move through recovery. And then in the long term, the reimagination of what's next. And that's really an assessment of two things in my mind. One is, how has our risk matrix changed, and how does our strategy fit with the new normal? And so in short, I'll leave it there. We'll get into more of that, but that's what's keeping me up at night.
Okay, thank you, Patty. Marilyn, what topics are dominating your board discussions in the resource sector?
Thanks, Lauren. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And first of all, let me say, I never thought we'd be living through such unprecedented times in my lifetime. You know, having worked most of my career in oil and gas, and then more recently in mining, you know, we've dealt with severe and prolonged downturns, but really nothing like this global pandemic. So, you know, I think something of this scale and scope really is new to all of us. Both of the companies I work with, New Gold and Wheaton Precious Metals, have suffered impacts from the COVID crisis. At New Gold, we decided to voluntarily shut down one of our mines for 2 weeks. And that was to allow our employees to quarantine, given they frequently travel across the US border, given our close proximity to it. And that was before any of the government mandates or directives came out in that respect. And we've actually never had any positive COVID cases, but still had to do the right thing there to prevent that from happening. And at Wheaton, a couple of our partner companies had to temporarily suspend their mining operations in Mexico and Peru because of government-imposed sanctions. So once New Gold and Wheaton had, you know, kind of responded to those pressing employee and community safety issues, in my view, the biggest concern for our board has become the macro environment and really the timing of economic recovery. You know, we've seen governments around the world incur huge amounts of debt just to keep the economy going as, you know, very needed emergency measures. You've seen companies and individuals incur, you know, significant debt. You know, but the question is, you know, what are going to be the long-term consequences of this? You know, Canada, I believe, is approaching $250 billion in debt. I don't like to say the word trillion and debt in the same sentence. You know, it's huge. And you know, I think other countries have taken similar measures. But it begs, you know, many questions, you know, that companies and boards really need to consider as we move forward. And, you know, for me, like, what does this mean in terms of fiscal, future fiscal impacts, such as taxation? You know, how are businesses going to access needed capital for investment, given, you know, some of the debt, you know, laden balance sheets that they have? What happens if there's further waves of COVID, as Patty was talking about? And, you know, will we see further regulatory restrictions in terms of suspending businesses? We don't know when, you know, the borders are going to open. So, you know, all of these things are on our minds. And you have to say, well, we've been fortunate at my companies that gold prices have had a nice run as investors were looking to safe haven investments. But on the other hand, copper prices have been very depressed because of demand destruction. And all we really know is that there's likely to be continued volatility in commodity prices. And that's both in reaction to, you know, fundamental structural factors, but also the emotional factors, which seem to really swing the market on various days. So these are the concerns, kind of areas of discussion for us in this rebound phase.
Thank you, Marilyn. Beth, what are the issues that not-for-profits are having to manage?
Thanks so much, Lauren. It's great to be here as well. And I sit on a couple of not-for-profits, one being Homefront and the other one being the campaign co-chair for United Way, which I'm privileged to do. So thanks for having me here. And I also sit on some private boards, but I won't talk about those. In addition to the answers that we have already heard from both Patty and from Marilyn, you know, I would add a couple of things. Like their organizations where their concerns are centered around similar issues, being managing your people, the risks and strategy. There is, though, for not-for-profits, a slight difference than what those organizations have. And I would highlight on the people side, you know, on a not-for-profit, most of not-for-profits are made up of a number of employees, but that number is fairly lean because they are a not-for-profit, and also volunteers, and that includes board members. So, and those board members and volunteers may be focused on their own demands, being both work and family. So your manpower is deeply affected in a not-for-profit at this time, when the demand for services are extremely high. And in addition to that, the not-for-profit sector on those social agencies is on the front line. So you also have the added concern of burnout and stress. On the risk side, the way that I would say a not-for-profit, the view is that, as I mentioned, the demand for services are high, but that's at a time also when the resourcing for both manpower and financial may not be there to support it. As a result of COVID and the economic downturn or slowdown, funding models have been drastically changed. Traditional funding through private donation has significantly decreased. So, and the question becomes, like, how do you do delivery of a fundraising initiative when you're being socially isolated? So those are the questions that cause complexity currently for the not-for-profits in this space. There is, of course, some instances where governments have stepped into that void, but the question remains as to how long is that sustainable for. Some of you may have noticed, as an example, yesterday in the Globe and Mail, there was a full-page open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada from the campaign co-chair for United Way in Toronto, asking that the Prime Minister consider removing the capital gains tax of private company shares and real estate to allow that to be made as charitable donations. It's those kinds of things right now that are occurring because of that funding model change. Lastly, on the strategic side, what I would say in the NFP space is that COVID is first and foremost a health pandemic with naturally occurring social ramifications with longer term social shifts. So, for example, domestic violence and an increase in domestic violence. So strategically, it becomes imperative for there to be collaborations across the sector and with major stakeholders. And I could say that within United Way and Homefront, I've noticed that in both of those, that's been a key implementation on our part. So those are some of the issues that we've had to manage going forward in the NFP sector.
Thank you, Beth. So I think what we've got now is a really nice picture of the complexity and the uncertainty all the way from global trends down to local. And your discussion also reflects a transition. What we have in front of here is a nice visual from the Boston Consulting Group, reflecting the transition from the beginning of the COVID all the way through to hoping that we are just going to have to live with it and everything else returns back to normal. And so what I've heard you discuss is kind of that initial reaction, moving into the recession and moving into a rebound phase. So we'll start with you, Marilyn. Let's think about this rebound phase. What advice would you give boards whose organizations are into this rebound phase?
Thanks, Lauren. The best piece of advice I can give is that if you haven't already done so, you need to shift from a state of reacting to events, really managing the crisis in the now, to being proactive and focusing on the future, in this rebound phase. And this really means thinking about the longer term strategic considerations in addition to those shorter term tactical measures. I've found that we really need to challenge our assumptions and our mindsets about what the best operating model is for the future as, you know, what's worked in the past may not be optimal go forward anymore, especially considering the level of global change and uncertainty as a result of COVID. In my view, a way of shifting our thinking to the future is to work through different possible what-if scenarios, and then really assess the impact on such critical items as maintaining adequate liquidity, financial flexibility, and kind of looking at that over the next 18 to 24 months, but also any further impacts on the business that should be considered, you know, in our longer term strategy. You know, at Wheaton Precious Metals, we've always focused on monitoring trends and assessing economic conditions and potential future impacts. And in fact, we've got a full-time researcher doing this. I see that as more important than ever now, with COVID having such a profound impact on the world economy, and with the geopolitical uncertainty, you know, that we're seeing as well, which, you know, isn't just as a result of COVID, but, you know, with other risks such as trade and price wars, upcoming elections. You know, there's a number of different factors. So as demand-supply dynamics shift and consumer preferences change, you know, at Wheaton, we may need to further consider diversifying the metals in our portfolio, or whether we need to make any changes to our business model of the future. And we may not have the answers right now, but I'm confident that we've got the strategic processes and the resilience to change course as risks and opportunities become apparent. And then, you know, we can align our strategy with these new market realities.
Thank you, Marilyn. Beth, what advice do you have for organizations that are having to rebound with minimal resources?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. That's a great question. So, you know, from the NFP side, one of the observations I would make that, as I mentioned before, is that a lot of them are being just absolutely overwhelmed right now in order to be able to provide services. And that I don't even know if they would have had an opportunity to think about rebound. So in fact, for some of those NFPs, rebound may be a totally different time frame for other organizations, like a business organization, because of that. But one of the things, and the reasons for that is because also, as I mentioned before, about the different social factors that arise as we go through this pandemic, they will be different ones that come up that the social agencies will have to be able to respond to. So one of my pieces of advice would be, though, no matter when that is that it's super important for senior leaders or the board to be able to take the time to contemplate that rebound and make it part of their discussions or in their meetings, and they do it on a sort of continuous cycle basis. The questions that I think that they should be asking themselves, and this is unusual for NFPs because you don't think about them as being innovative necessarily, but is to how to innovate to deliver the services that they're providing so that they can do it on a more cost-effective basis, because that's what the demands are going to be in terms of the financial demands, financial funding going down. And they'll have to think about how they're going to go about doing that in a COVID world, whether that comes back or not, and how to be resilient, which is Marilyn mentioned, and I think is incredibly key, and to be able to pivot in the face of uncertainty, you know, in terms of the demand that's going to be placed on those services and in terms of funding. And lastly, I would say how to ensure that they have the manpower over the next 2 to 3 years to be able to cope with that, because we don't have a time frame. And I think one of the things that hasn't really been thought of as much is if that manpower, especially in NFP, is affected through volunteers, etc. If this goes on longer than what we are looking at, then that will also have a great impact on the organization in terms of reaching its goals. So those are the kinds of things I think they should be thinking about.
Thank you, Beth. You're still in the reaction, many of them, and then having to think through to that cost effectiveness. Patty, what advice would you give retail organizations or business to consumer organizations as they enter the rebound phase?
Thanks, Lauren. So the one thing I think is maybe true with all organizations, but particularly in a customer-facing organization, is that these phases are not linear. They are, you know, really for a customer-facing business, you are going to be in all of these phases, maybe to greater or lesser degrees. And so I think that that's, I call it rebound or reimagination with a healthy respect for relapse. Lots of re's in there. But that's really the way I think you have to view it, because you have that essential service, customer-facing accountability, you know, in the face of a very significant pandemic. Again, I'll come back to my quote that resonates for me, that a crisis-ready board has a plan and the right people in place. And I think for a retailer, that means this is an opportunity to take a real refresh and look at your strategic plan so that you know you have the right plan. And again, understanding how that might have changed. And then your people review. You're having the right people in place. And there's three aspects to that. One is health and safety. Two is, how is your culture changing or being impacted? And three, do you have the right skills going forward? And those two, I think, larger scale reviews, specifically for retails and bricks and mortar retails like we have, this is the opportunity. I think finally that we've broken the back of embracing and accelerating technology, looking, and this is more than just e-commerce, although that's a key one, but also customer relations, management systems, back-end systems, ordering systems, fulfillment systems. I think this is the time to really look at that, and very much like Beth said, thinking through your cost structure and how technology can support. And the other one I would say for retail is your supply chain. Understanding where, you know, in a grocery retailer, but understanding where your supply is coming from, impacts from the pandemic on international and national supply chain, manufacturing shifts, how those businesses are changing their practices. Are they streamlining their products? Are things available the way they used to be? But the other side of it also is understanding your customer demographics. The one thing we've noticed in retail is our forecast went out the window, because what people normally buy in June, the second week of June, is not what they're buying right now. And yes, part of it is sourdough comfort food, but part of it is just eating at home, the shift to fresh meats and fresh fruit and vegetables versus, you know, some of the other trends that you might have seen in grocery. So you really kind of got to look at your whole supply chain and understand where that's coming from, because that's ultimately your value proposition.
Thank you. So really in this rebound phase, what I've heard you say is we do still need to monitor, particularly in the resource sector, the global trends, understand them well. We need to be aware of what's happening after we've kind of hit that brick wall and said, okay, what's going on? We've got to be monitoring that front line for information, and also the value of knowing what's going on in your supply chains. So that is in the rebound phase. There is also the reimagination phase, and this one is more getting ready to move out of rebound and be ready for those changes that you are predicting to see. So how have your organization, in Beth, in the not-for-profit sector, what have they been doing to predict the new normal?
It's a great question, Lauren. Thank you. So as I mentioned before, I'm chair of Homefront, and Homefront is the coordinator to domestic violence in the justice system and the supporting agencies. And then I'm also campaign co-chair for United Way. So when I look at this slide that you've got here and put up what's happened in Homefront, I see how this cycle is reflected of some of the things that have happened there. So for instance, in this early experience, the courts shut down except for emergency orders for Homefront. And obviously that was a grave concern because of the fact that we had to be there for the victim's side. And with the courts shutting down and there being social isolation for those victims that put them at higher risk. So one of the things that we had to do right away was to be able to arrange to be able to support those victims virtually. And by doing that, we were able to do it. We responded to it within about 2 weeks or so, and we were able to do it. And by doing that, we really became, as they talk about in this cycle, the Mavericks. And then from there, what we noticed was then about how social changes were, that there was an increasing number of domestic violence cases. And on the trend side, our data showed us from China, who had gone through this already, that there was 3 times the amount of domestic violence in China during COVID than any other time. Now, we're not like the Chinese, but that tells you that there is a trend that's there. And so as we go forward on that and recognizing it, and having some of the courts now saying that they can do virtual sessions, we're going to be thinking that we will need to be able to ramp up for further cases, domestic violence cases. And we think that by the way that we've done it through our early experience by being a Maverick, that we might be able to continue to do it virtually and therefore do more. So that gives you one example of the reimagination. On the second side, on the United Way side, as soon as COVID hit, her early experience was that United Way was called in to become a partner with the city and with the CEMA, which is the Calgary Emergency Management Agency, and also with the Calgary Foundation, to be able to support the front lines, which was the social agencies, with money and resources, and to be able to better track manpower and need, and did it together collaboratively. And as a result of doing that, on the Maverick side, we recognized that how effective that was. And by doing that, how we were able to see social change within the sector and look at the trends going forward. And as a result of all of that, we were able to say that going forward for now, we know that as a sector that we have to use collaboration as a tool in our toolkit throughout this whole time, working with others, including major stakeholders. And lastly, on the United Way side, I would say as one of the examples is that on the fundraising, that we're going into our social impact lab to be able to determine what we should be doing going forward. So that gives you some examples within my own organizations of this reimagination, how it's working as a tool. And the last thing I would sort of say also is on this, once again, I'd highlight the social changes and the social issue shift. I would highlight to other organizations how important that is, and how to see that, predict it, and pivot. And I think it's really key to be aware of that. We've seen it in the US. There's been some experts that suggest that what is happening in the US is the impact of COVID has added fire to a flame that was already there, right? And I think that as time goes on, and if there is reoccurrences, there will be other social changes or sparks that get lit. So those are my
Thank you, Beth. Thank you. Very interesting on how you have been able to take those Maverick experiences and realize what's needed for the future. Patty, what's been happening in your organization to help you predict the new normal?
Well, it's tough to call a primarily bricks and mortar business a Maverick, but I do think early experiences, trend coherence, and social changes is definitely where our management and board are turning. And I'll give you a few examples. Health and safety, for example, obviously absolutely critical for customer and our frontline workers. But we've actually just in the process of engaging an internal audit to assess not only our compliance on health and safety, but how we could actually take learnings and integrate that into forward practices. Recognizing that customers and the public are going to be much more conscious going forward of what a high-touch experience retail shopping is. And so I think that early experience and taking those learnings and turning it into a strategic or competitive advantage is a really positive way at looking. We've invested millions into the costs associated with protecting our team and our customers and our members. So how do you take those learnings and translate them? So the second, I think, really plays more into the ESG component, which is community impact. Understanding, we've all sort of realized that these grocery workers and pharmacists and those that played these essential service roles, the unsung heroes, but the role that we play in community. And I think there's a real opportunity in the new normal to think harder about that. And I think the social purpose of a cooperative, that's in our DNA. Fortunately, that's not a pivot so much as it's an opportunity. The third one I would mention, I think, in our new normal is governance changes and how we as a board operate. And in thinking on this, it's everything from, our ability to work virtually, both pros and cons of that, but actually how we engaged with our management team through this, how we communicated. What became crystal clear was the importance of our people and the emphasis of all reporting to focus first, people first. I think, again, this was not a pivot for Calgary Co-op, but I think it will become part of our new normal, is that people first component and that strategic oversight. While we know governance is shifting from a pure compliance, nose in, fingers out model, I think COVID really demonstrated how boards had to sit in, particularly at the beginning, on, I think all of us, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, you'd be worried immediately about your cash flow and your ability to pay your team members. Boards were sitting in much more operationally. We have to move out of that, but we have to keep that perspective of there are no compliance quarterly rules anymore, and how do we create the best governance going forward. My final one, I think, in a new normal for us is there will be opportunities, there will be acquisition, there will be opportunities for standalone businesses or changes that come out of the new order. And I think that, Marilyn's points about liquidity and stabilizing and building resilience is also your ability to lean into the opportunities that come. So that's all part of the new normal.
Thank you, Patty. Marilyn, what are some of the things your board has done to think about the new normal?
Thanks, Lauren. So I'd like to provide kind of two perspectives here, and I'll start with an example from New Gold. For New Gold, as we reimagine the future, where we've seen real opportunity is to more aggressively pursue automation of our mine sites in the future. I think the COVID crisis really brought home the point to us that, we could much more extensively employ technology, and that we really need to consider more of those opportunities to automate. And while we've been discussing that for some time in terms of smaller initiatives, we just hadn't felt really the urgency and perhaps the compelling business case that we absolutely see now. And it's not for lack of seeing some of the mavericks out there, or some of the larger companies who have fully automated mine sites, and then they were able to confidently operate during the COVID crisis. So because they didn't have that same reliance on site-specific workforce, especially in the remote areas. For us, I think it was really how do we see how this plays into the short term and the long term, and how do we understand more specifically what the opportunities are. And so to move this forward, our board asked management to work up some potential scenarios. What's a scenario where we can maximize automation, identify both immediate short term, and then those that would require longer term investment, and then assess what the implementation could look like over our life of mine plans. And so for us, being able to see how technology and innovation can play into our shorter term tactical plans and our long-term strategy is going to help us reimagine the future. But my second point is that, really beyond, these kind of more concrete examples of how we're reimagining the future, what really helps me sleep at night is that I think in both our companies, we've really strengthened our resiliency. And so, you know, we now have the confidence to know that we can act quickly to changing events. So what I think is key to future success is the ability to manage in a continuing uncertain environment. And I really believe we've become more resilient, more agile, more proactive in terms of how we manage those inevitable changes and the associated risks and opportunities. And so for us, you know, this has meant, you know, faster decision-making processes, more ad hoc board meetings, more monitoring of the external environment, using some of these catalysts, you know, to pursue more technology, you know, really, you know, doing things in a different way. And what's helped us get there, I believe, is the diversity of our boards. So in the case of New Gold, where almost half our board are women, we've quite a different mix of skills and industry experience and quite a range of ages. It's really helped us create that needed dialogue, you know, to challenge the current assumptions, really explore the opportunities that might come out of this, and then to learn from others' examples as well. So those are the two perspectives I'd like to offer on reimagination.
Oh, thank you very much, Marilyn. Now, I know that time is running quickly. So, Marilyn, I'm going to ask you if you have one key takeaway that you could kind of close with.
Sure. So, you know, there's a quote that has really resonated for me, and you see it on the screen from Henry Kissinger, you know, who said that the historic challenge for leaders is to manage the crisis while building, you know, for the future. And I think this really well describes our current challenge, but not easy. You know, how do we do this given the world of uncertainty we continue to live in? And so to me, and you've heard me say this now a number of times, resilience is key. You know, that's going to be, to me, the differentiating skill as we move forward. And I really believe that the more resilient your business is, the better you'll be able to adapt your tactics and your strategies as needed to build that successful future.
Thank you, Marilyn. All right, Beth, what are your key takeaway?
I love that quote that Kissinger has there. I agree with it completely. Thanks for putting it up, Marilyn, and raising it with us. I also think coming out of that, in order to be able to get to that result that Kissinger talks about in his quote, is that there really is key right now is leadership. And we have to show leadership. It's a critical component in order for the organization to get through that. And it's a time when organizations get to live their values and walk the talk. And for senior leaders, including the board, to set the tone at the top and support the organization and its teams by showing empathy, building trust and collaboration, and through effective communication. And if they do all that, by doing that, we get an environment where there is an awareness of opportunity and positiveness, and that there will be innovation that comes out of that opportunity because you have a team that trusts each other and is able to support each other. And that gets us to that reimagination. It builds the blocks for successful reimagination and helps us get through it. So that would be my takeaway, is leadership.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Great takeaway. And Patty, what would be your takeaway?
So last but not least, you know, and again, I support and completely agree with Marilyn and Beth, and I think both of those approaches lead into the importance of ensuring you have the right plan. So that, to me, at this time, does entail a deep review of both your enterprise risk matrix and your organizational strategy. You know, as an example for Calgary Co-op, we've taken our normal June strategy review retreat opportunity, and it's going to be divided up over a series of 4 meetings starting in June and ending in October. You know, not only are the fundamentals, take all your measurements, whether it's your budget or your executive compensation measures, your forecasts, Everything is upside down and backwards right now. So your ability to make decisions is on changed ground, but it's really important to take the time and do that review. And as you look at the changes to your strategy, you have to go back to your risk matrix then and say, how is this mitigating or creating new risks? I believe there's an opportunity here for optimism. Unless your organization is in crisis through the crisis, we should be moving into a place where you can look forward with optimism. But I, again, always say have a healthy respect for that relapse and keep an eye on the ball there as well and on your teams.
Thank you so much, Patty. So now going to Q&A. And I think there's still some time for Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tanya, and have you take some of the questions that may have already been sent in.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So we actually do have a few questions that have come in. So the first one really could go to all three of you, or four of you. In light of the current impact of racial diversity, especially in Canada, it appears that Canadian boards still don't reflect the diversity that's suggested. What is your board planning for the board representation to reflect the diverse group of investors? Go ahead, Marilyn.
And I can maybe just offer some perspectives on it. At both my boards, we've made some specific, some fairly sweeping changes as a result of board renewal, and we're looking for diversity across all kinds of dimensions because we know the value of that at the end of the day. And just to speak to some personal experience, in 2014, I was part of, it was called the Diversity 50 initiative across Canada to promote, to identify really board-ready candidates of minority backgrounds, basically. And, they picked the top 50 board-ready and then gave us a ton load of profile, to be honest, across different parts of the country and different, corporations. To help encourage, that board-ready pool of candidates, because you often hear, oh, we don't have, qualified candidates that fit those diverse categories. Well, quite honestly, I think we've got some great candidates out there, but it's creating the profile and creating those candidate pools when you start to commence your interviewing process to make sure you've got that broad range of diversity so that you're able to really identify them, with the right fit and need of your board is.
I would add, sorry, I'm just going to jump in if that's okay. I would add, as co-chair of the Institute of Corporate Directors, one of the things that we started this year was we actually started a mentoring program. And the mentoring program, we made sure that we had that diversity within the mentoring program for candidates. And we found that it was picked up quite quickly, and we're hoping that by doing that mentoring program, that it helps those that you wouldn't, some of those diverse candidates be seen better within our organization. And on the not-for-profit side, I would say that on our Homefront board, it's kind of funny, we were oversubscribed in women. And so we've actually brought some men back in it because the spectrum has to be both, right? You have to be able to deal on both sides. So we have a matrix that we utilize for picking our candidates. So I offer those comments.
Great. Patty, I think you had something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly agree with those comments. One of the things that's absolutely fundamental to diversity is taking a look at our job description. If we continue to see that the perspective of board-ready candidacy means you had to have been a CEO at a large public company, sector-specific, we really cut down on the pool of candidates. We know in Canada less than 5% of our CEOs are women, let alone women of visible minority or persons of color. So, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't take a really good look at the qualifications, because if you build a job profile that no woman looks at and says, I see myself in that, and then say, well, there was no candidates, it becomes quite easy to justify the meritocracy. So I think we as the boards and the organizations have to take a level of accountability too in our board recruitment to say, are we building a broad enough profile so that people can see themselves in it? And then the women and the individuals that create that diversity will come forward. They're out there. We're all out there.
Great, thank you. I just want to reiterate, if anyone has a question, you can either ask in the chat and I will pose it to the group, or you can go to the bottom of your screen and click the participants menu. The option to raise your hand will appear and then I can call on you to ask your question. So there was a question that just came through from Amanda. What are the main differences between the ICDD program and other governance training programs such as Governance Solutions?
You know, as co-chair, I would say that I'm not familiar with a whole bunch of the other ones. I'm only familiar with the ICDD program, and I can say the one thing for sure is that it's a year-long program. You have to be selected for it. You have to have experience, and you also end up having an exam at the end where you are certified. So I think that would be one of the differences in comparison, I think, to some of the others, but I'm actually not that familiar with some of the other programs. And I'm happy to follow up with you if you would like me to talk to you further about that.
I'm a member of Governance Solutions, and that one in particular is really focused on board secretaries support. There's a governance component to it for sure, and actually some of the training is really excellent. But it is focused on the role of the board, supporting the board, versus kind of that mindset of fiduciary duty and how you actually meet the duty to discharge your role as a board member. So sometimes when you're looking at the programs, you know, take a look at the chair or the seat that they're looking at that board role from, and that helps you discern the difference.
Great. So there's a question that came through here for the panel that says, I would like to know what the panel participants have experienced with respect to the increase in D&O insurance costs at this time. Is this signaling a higher expectation of claims against directors who have not reacted as they should have in the short term? Is there any change in the degree of focus on board decision-making processes that are intended to protect boards and directors from personal liability?
Well, to date, I haven't had that that awareness. You know, D&O is going up, but so is our entire insurance portfolio. So we haven't seen D&O go up out of line. As a matter of fact, the highest has been in the general liability and property categories, less so in D&O. I think what I'm seeing on boards is a really good review of D&O for ensuring that you have the right limits in place. And that you have the right cumulative limits in place so that, you know, if you all ended up in a claim, you haven't maxed out. So, but I'm not seeing that D&O is actually driving any change in how the boards, at least that I serve, are looking at their accountabilities.
Great. So I have a question for the panel. So our theme this week is, you know, what keeps senior leaders up at night? Do you have any comments on what helps you sleep at night right now? Is there anything reassuring to you?
Well, I jump in on that one, Tanya. I think it's a great question, and you know, obviously a little lighthearted, you know, a glass of wine before bed does help. But anyway, what I would say is, you know, what helps me sleep at night is that it's so true that every crisis brings an opportunity, and you've heard that before on that saying. And what I've seen here is that opportunity often brings innovation. And the third thing I would say, what helps me sleep at night, is that I know that Calgary has an entrepreneurial mindset, and it's got a great spirit. So if you have those three combinations, which is opportunity, innovation, entrepreneurial mindset, and spirit, we're going to be sure to come out of this just fine. And as maybe, and hopefully even better. That's, and what I'm hopeful for too is that I know that that next generation is part of that. And as somebody who is the campaign co-chair for United Way, I've already seen that come together in terms of on the social side through the COVID fund. It's amazing how we've come together as a community to support each other. And I know that we know how to do this. So that is what helps me sleep at night.
Anybody else want to add anything there?
So I completely agree with Beth, including about the glass of wine. Go ahead, Patty.
The only thing I would add, you know, what helps me, you know, is certainly the quality of the individuals I work with, and seeing. And I think it's aligned with what Beth said. You know, you're seeing management teams and boards really collectively bring that that diligence, their diverse perspectives, and those really important values, which is people first. And when you see that happen, you know, it's not the gravy. That's actually what makes it work.
There was a specific question posed to Marilyn. Do you have a level of automation at your mine sites, and you're accelerating it as a result of COVID, or has COVID struck the need for new automation throughout the sites and potential integration?
Oh, great question. So we already have a certain amount of automation at our mine sites. You know, I can give you an example. Like I went on a mine site tour of our new Afton mine, which is just north of Kamloops, block cave, deep underground. And I was amazed, you know, that, you know, they had these huge big loaders really operating autonomously, you know, based on one person sitting in a little control room with a laptop, you know, who was kind of directing it all. And so we've got, you know, various applications in our various mine sites, but, you know, at Rainy River, which is northwestern Ontario and quite remote, really hard sometimes to get workforce, you know, because you've got work camps and that sort of thing. And, you know, even though we've got, you know, some automation applications, I think we could really make a step change there in terms of the degree of automation, and then maybe less reliance on having to bring in workforce from afar, or, you know, work camps, and, you know, make the best of both worlds of people and technology. So it's, you know, it's that desire now for more of a step change, and, you know, that urgency to look at a bigger change over time, because it costs money and you need to, you know, have the right pace for change.
Great. The next question is, while many companies are implementing work from home policies, how do you maintain a positive and engaged culture?
There we go. I'll do this one. How's that? I think that, you know, that is for a lot of people, that's a tough one in terms, especially if somebody is hasn't been with the organization very long. But I know within my own organization, and I'm counsel for BLG, it is that what we've done is, because we're all working from home there, is we've got a number of things that we've done. Is we've got chat buddies that we've set up, and from the not-for-profit side, actually even on the Homefront side, we set up buddies between our executive and our board members in terms of having that connection, because we're also all working from home there too. And we've also done things like where we've brought in from my work side, where they've got a yoga instructor that comes in, and they have yoga classes, Zoom yoga classes, virtual drinks, sharing of different, we even have now a page where everybody puts down their favorite latest reads or Netflix. So by doing that, it's building a community beyond just work. It's becoming very social and personal. And I've noticed that that's been one of the great benefits. Well, not benefits, but silver linings out of all this, is that all of a sudden I'm getting to know my other colleagues on a more intimate basis outside of their work life. So those are some of the things we've done. And plus also one of the other things we've done is at United Way, we offer up around mental health, working from home type of supports. So if any organization is looking for help that way, we have a session that we offer for that.
Great. I think we have time for the one last question that just came in from Alex. So the question is, what is the strategy going forward to ensure Canada becomes more self-sustainable on a global scale? Will there be a push to lobby the government to entice resource refining in-house, or possible infrastructure projects such as pipelines to get us back on track as part of the reimagination?
That's beyond my pay grade. I don't know, Marilyn, you work in more of a global stage. The company I'm here to reference is more local.
Sure, I mean, I can throw in my 2 cents here. I was going to say that's the $1 trillion question that you've just asked. So as we've been saying here, the future's uncertain, but our governments are whether it's federal, provincial, around the world, quite honestly, they've all been reacting obviously to the crisis and all these short-term measures, and they're going to have to take a step back, and they're going to have to really, I'm based on what I said, I'm an advocate for scenario planning. I think they're going to have to take a step back and really seriously consider, how they stimulate the economy, how they really, start to get the economy back on track, and really think about what's driving our GDP. And, we know the resource sector is a significant contributor to that, but, we need to, be able to obviously look at some different strategies to help encourage and promote that. And, I'll speak maybe more specifically to oil and gas, but we know we need market access to move our oil, and it's been all over the newspapers and a huge topic of conversation over the last year or so. There needs to be attention there, or else, we're going to be subject to, these price impacts that we can't manage. So I guess my biggest, maybe it's a concern rather than an answer, but I really hope that as we work through this, we think about, governments think about the information and data and real facts at hand of, different opportunities and strategies as they move forward, and really think through the unintended consequences. And I think I recollect this right, in Alberta, there's been a Premier's Council created of 12 incredibly respected leaders. I think Jack Mintz is one, and Macklin Willingham is another, to look at, how do we diversify Alberta's economy, and what can we do to help support recovery as we move forward. And to me, those are the, we talk here today about how do you reimagine the future. I think we need to put the best, thinking we can forward in terms of what that looks like, but we really need to, get the economy back on its feet and really think using facts and concrete plans about how to do that. So a bit general, sorry, in terms of an answer, but those are some of my thoughts.
Great. Okay, I think that concludes our time today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and especially our panelists. And a quick note that our last session in the series will be next week and taking place on Thursday, June 18th. And it'll be on project management and providing value through project management. And a note, again, that it's Thursday, not Wednesday. If you have a moment to fill out our feedback survey that will be sent out after the fact, that would be great. We're looking for your feedback on the session. And thank you all for joining us today.